This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to Balanced Debate for the Old North State. On this edition, we have breaking news concerning the Atlantic Coast Pipeline saga. We're going to discuss the beginning of candidate filings and some recent polls. We'll debate the two lawsuits regarding public school governance and talk about a new trend where lawmakers attempt to throw out the judges that rule against them. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's introduce you to this week's panel. They include Connie Wilson, former legislator, Chris Fitzsimon, political analyst and syndicated columnist, Becki Gray with the John Locke Foundation, and Dennis Wicker, former lieutenant governor. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages by our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Agriculture. It's North Carolina's #1 economic driver. It puts people to work. It powers our economy. And as agriculture grows, so does our quality of life. North Carolina Farm Bureau is proud to support agriculture and our farmers because agriculture connects us all.
We got breaking news for you this week about the swirling debate regarding HB 90 that the House passed and sent to Governor Cooper earlier this week. The $58 million included as part of the approval of Atlantic Coast Pipeline was not, as legislators labeled it, a slush fund. In fact, Governor Cooper wasn't involved in the discussions that started last July and involved rural leaders and the owners of the pipeline. Some rural leaders were concerned about potential environmental issues and economic development issues like spurs going from the pipeline to communities and counties not in the path. These discussions resulted in the agreement by the utility companies to provide $58 million to help mitigate some of the concerns. Only then was the state and the administration brought in. I want to go around the table and ask each of you, does this new information change your perspective about this pipeline deal at all? Becki, I'll start with you.
You know, Tom, it really does, and it's this question and it's others that have evolved since then. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this story, and as we look at these questions, whether it's with, you know, this latest disclosure that these arrangements really began in July of 2017, you know, at that time the General Assembly was in session. That big energy bill, HB 589, was at the very end of being negotiated. There's just a lot of questions involved with this that I think this latest revolution, I think if anything, it says to me, we're not at the bottom of this. There's still a lot of questions we need answers
Dennis,
to.
Does it change your perspective in any way?
No, not really. I respectfully disagree with Becki on that. I think the question should be asked, but I don't think with in a sinister way. I think anytime that you have a project like this and things like this pop up like we saw, we ought to get to the bottom of what happened. But, you know, I think for other reasons, mainly because this didn't originate in Cooper's office, but out there in eastern North Carolina, it tells me that, you know, mischief has created the skepticism.
Chris?
Well, first of all, we have the legislation passed, which I hope we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Yeah. This doesn't dramatically change it. I think that this wasn't handled in the most transparent and open way, which I think probably would have been. We probably should have known this before. I don't disagree that this should have come out this summer. It's been rendered moot in some ways by the legislation that was passed. I think people are jumping to alarming conclusions, though, as if this is the worst thing that's ever happened in North Carolina and somehow everybody's violated the Constitution, ought to be thrown in jail. I think people are getting a little too excited about it.
Connie?
It doesn't change my opinion on the money at all constitutionally. In fact, it's weird that now it's almost like another argument. Oh, we should have told you about this. Here's another issue that's popped up. No matter what, it's the General Assembly who appropriates. When the governor signed the contract, that was state money. He was involved in that. He brought state government into it. This whole thing has been one big political misstep. It's been strategically poorly handled.
It's not just a political misstep. Chris said, you know, it hasn't been the most transparent thing. I think that's the understatement of this whole discussion. And one reason why people are jumping to these conclusions of quid pro quo or other, other thing, asking those questions is because nobody will answer the questions. You know, we need to know things like, you know, Dennis, to your point, when was the governor involved in this? You know, why can't we see, what I'd like to see are the different drafts of the memorandum of understanding.
To that point, Chris, you
start?
used to be a newsman, as you said previously, you used to play one on television. Where was the news media in all this? Why weren't they asking the questions of how did this come about and who was involved in it?
They will. Although I will say this, to hear people on this panel complain about the lack of transparency, given the General Assembly session and the way even this was handled, for goodness sakes, we literally said to people, our kids' class size doesn't really matter nearly as much as fixing this pipeline thing or trying to take over the Board of Elections. It's unbelievable to me that we're going to complain about transparency. I'm complaining about it, but we should be complaining about it every time we call a special session and don't have an agenda.
We should complain about this Christmas tree bill that HB 90 that they passed. But Dennis, so far as it goes, you and Connie both served in the legislature for a long period of time. I want to know, why weren't our legislative leaders, if the news media wasn't asking these questions, why weren't the legislative leaders asking questions about how did this come about? Who was involved in this discussion? Instead, they wanted to take a pound of flesh out of Governor Cooper.
Well, actually, they have been asking questions and sending lists.
I did not hear those questions coming at all.
You know, sometimes they have asked tons of questions. They have sent letters, maybe not that specific question because they didn't know what was going on. But there have been questions.
Isn't it part of their job to find out, though?
Well,
look, all of us at this table, if we're going to argue that politics wasn't involved in this, we're being naive. Right. Okay, so let's get to the point of it. It is politics. Look, this Cooper side of the story is just not getting out there. He does have one side of the story that would indicate that he was doing everything in earnest.
But Governor Cooper didn't help himself any here. Announcing this $58 million at the same time you announced the approval.
I was getting ready to say that in a couple instances, the optics don't look good.
They don't.
And you know, for example, finding out that his newly hired lobbyists used to represent these companies, you know, and things like announcing the daggone pipeline permits were going to be written, and they came back and said, oh, by the way, we got this money out of it too.
But Becki, neither did he go into any explanation, and he's got a bully pulpit. I got to believe if the governor wanted to say this, we could hear what that money was going to be used for.
Where did it come
said
from?
Was it was going to be used for environmental and economic development technology, and then he included energy in that
renewable
too,
energy,
which by the way was not part of the original understanding, as I've been told.
Right, and that's another question out there. You know, we've recently come across a memo that was submitted by one of the executive directors for one of the solar energy alliances, who referenced on January 29th, the Monday after the governor announced the pipeline deal and this $58 million fund that had been set up, the solar people issued a memo thanking him for reaching a settlement that would circumvent some of the implementation procedures that had been part of HB 8, the big energy bill, 829. I can't remember the bill number, but he was thanking the governor for doing that. Well, that raises all kinds of questions of, if there was a problem in that bill that was passed, that the governor signed, that had been enacted into law, why is the governor working out a settlement to circumvent the procedure?
Well,
why didn't that go back to the General Assembly?
The sources who told me about this story had nothing to say whatsoever about solar energy or anything. That wasn't part of the original agreement.
We've been focusing on the environment mitigation and the economic development.
Which
I think
is
maybe
legitimate,
the questions need to turn
because it costs more than $1 million
to
run a spur off that pipeline. Somebody's got to do it. Chris, we talked about this last week, and we said the governor was essentially put in a box here. If he vetoed this bill, then he was going to get gigged. We could just see the TV commercials. He was going to get gigged for voting against our children and classroom size and education and motherhood and apple pie and all of those kinds of things. On the other hand, if he lets it go, then essentially he has admitted that he didn't have the authority to appropriate this money. Did he do the right thing by signing it into law?
I think the governor decided that the class size fix was so urgent and so needed and so long delayed that he was willing to give ground and not do those other things. It's also important, you know, there's something in legislation called severability, which normally in a bill it says if any part of this is found unconstitutional, the rest are still in effect. They didn't put that in this bill this time. The General Assembly leaders care more about political gains on the Board of Elections and the Board of Ethics than they do about class size in public schools.
There has been a suggestion during this past week that these energy companies might come back and say, wait a minute, the $58 million we were willing to give was to be used for energy remediation and for economic development.
And renewable energy.
It did not say, the original agreement did not say renewable energy, that according to my sources. Now, my question is this.
When did that come in?
That's a very good question. My question is, what would happen if these energy companies came back and said, deal's off the table. We ain't giving the $58 million because you're going to spend it on schools instead of on what we have.
They won't do that. They are so happy to have this deal.
You think?
They are going to hang in there, and these energy companies are used to being in controversial situations like coal ash. They're going to hang with what's
Dennis,
out there.
let's get realistic about this. $58 million spread over those counties that are along the pipeline. That's like another gallon of water down Niagara Falls. It's not going to do any real good, is it?
Well, they think so, Tom. I mean, the people are pretty excited down east.
Well, sure, they're excited to get any dollars.
But to your point, you could argue that this is not going to have that great of an impact. I mean, it's one-time money, as I understand it. So, you know, I'm not sure we can count on it to come back again and be the same amount.
Yeah, but I think for, you know, the Johnston County school system, the Robeson County school system, all those folks, they are delighted to have this money. And, you know, Tom, I think this has gone too far. I don't think you can reset this and just go back to zero and make all of these questions and all of these concerns disappear.
The genie's out of the box.
If the General Assembly wanted Robeson County schools and Johnston County schools to have more money, why didn't they give it to them last session when they were putting a budget together and left money unspent sitting on the table?
Excellent question, among others. Well, and talking about our legislature this week, High Point University released the results of a poll asking people how they felt about the job our legislature was doing, along with our governor, our congressional delegation, and the president. We want to discuss that poll. A Meredith College poll that was also conducted this week, and also one from Public Policy Polling that might impact the elections. I want to ask Connie, the High Point poll showed that Governor Cooper had a 46% approval rating. The legislature has a 31% approval rating. If they're accurate, what do they tell you about how people feel in North Carolina?
It is very normal for the legislature to poll much lower. It's the same way with Congress. What I thought was interesting of the polls that came out is the Meredith poll, and it's that enthusiasm level. Because polls are nice, but do people really get out there to vote? And that's what you want. The Republicans and their supporters and the Democrats and their supporters, those candidates care about who's going to come out. And what came out of the Meredith poll is that the enthusiasm level is about the same, or maybe a little higher for Republicans.
But some of the results are all over the board. If you go look at the Trump approval ratings, for instance, the Trump approval rating in the High Point poll has Trump with a 38% approval rating. Meredith has him at 49%, and then the PPP has him only at 42%. That's a pretty wide disparity. Does it reflect on the sampling sizes or who was sampled?
It could reflect on that. There are always outliers. We don't know if the one at the top is the outlier or the one at the bottom is the outlier. I think these, and plus remember, we're a long way from 2018. We're even further away from 2020.
So do these polls at this point, should we pay much attention to them, Becki?
I think we should watch them. I don't think we should put all our eggs in that basket, certainly. And just, you know, like on the Trump polls, I'll just mention, I mean, you know, that's so volatile. I mean, if you ask the question in the morning, you could get a very different answer than you would in the afternoon.
But the Meredith poll, if you look at their results, it seemed like it was a very much more conservative, more Republican-leaning sample size. Of course, PPP is typically more Democratic-leaning. High Point has typically been in the middle. Okay, we talked about filing started last Monday, runs until February 28th. Dennis, you've been there. Connie, you've been there. We've already had some fairly interesting announcements of people who have said they're not running again this year. One of them was a guy you served with. I call him the Lion of the House, Mickey Michaud.
Oh, that legislature, whether you're Republican or Democrat, is going to miss Mickey Michaud. The service he has provided this state, the leadership, is unparalleled, and we all wish Mickey well, but how he lasted 40 years in that institution and is still walking tall is a real marvel to me.
With ulcers and stuff.
That's right.
Who else? What are some other notables?
Beverly Earl.
Beverly Earl, not running.
Member.
And another member of the, I think it's important to mention the Black Legislative Caucus. I mean, you know, that is not only the historical knowledge and background that they've had, but Angela Bryant, but you've also got, you know, those just stalwart advocates for the African American community, for the historically Black universities. I think it's a real loss to the university.
Some other names.
John Blust.
Jeff Collins.
John Blust out of
John
Guilford.
Blust. Oh, John Blust, yeah.
John Blust is not running.
Yeah.
Long time. Susan Martin.
Susan Martin is not coming back.
Pitt and Wilson. Any startling, surprising names that you've heard that have made announcements?
Well, you have Governor Hunt's daughter down in Mecklenburg County.
Really?
Yes. Representative Brawley.
Yes, she's in a Democrat primary, but she's running for the state house. So that's, you know,
I
got
had not picked up on
have
that.
another generation.
See, it is worth watching NC-SPAN.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes.
There were also some changes of some
DVR
folks there were some folks that we were hearing were going to file, but then have changed their mind. Jessica Holmes here in Wake County, I think, has decided to run again for county commission. Matt Calabria is another, I think, city council member. Yeah, some changes like that.
Here's one that you'll find interesting. I heard that former Congressman Bob Etheridge was thinking about running for the state senate.
Interesting.
No,
I heard
no.
that.
Where's his district?
Well, I heard that. To my friend Bobby.
Talking about congressmen, rumors all over Eastern Carolina. We're supposing that all 13 of our congressional delegation is going to run for re-election. We haven't heard differently. But we keep hearing all this stuff that's coming up about Walter Jones in the 3rd Congressional District, which is a song that goes around just about every 2 years, isn't it? Anything to that? Any problems there that y'all are aware of?
On the rumor end, and I mean, let me make clear this is just rumors, but we've heard Senator Harry Brown and Representative Greg Murphy as two names that are out there, but that's, you know.
Harry's announced he's not
You know,
gonna
and
run.
Robert Pittenger, I understand, has some real primary, really serious primary opposition.
Democrats have recruited a really strong candidate.
I want to move from the court of public opinion, which we've been talking about, to the North Carolina Supreme Court that's now considering 2 separate lawsuits concerning the governance of public education. The first involves a requirement that all rules and regulations established by the State Board of Education first must be reviewed by the Rules Review Commission. The second is a continuation of the age-old argument we've started this show with in 1998 about who's in charge of public education. Becki, let's start with the case involving rules reviews. State law requires that all agencies and boards and commissions have the Rules Review Commissions review any new regulations or policies. Now, the State Board of Education says that doesn't include them. What's your opinion?
I think it absolutely includes them. I think that it's important to have that Rules Review Commission. You know, we could talk about the bureaucracy of the Rules Review Commission and, you know, those, I mean, there are arguments that we ought not be having government oversee government. I think it's important to have that. I think they've done a good job. And I'm not sure why the State Board of Education feels like they are outside of that.
But here's what the Constitution says. I'm using my handy-dandy pocket Constitution. Says, the State Board of Education this is Article 9, Section 5. State Board of Education shall supervise and administer the free public school system and the educational funds provided for its support, except the funds mentioned in Section 7 of this article, and shall make all needed rules and regulations in relations thereto.
Well, that's what the court's going to decide. I mean, that's the case. You just read the case.
But there is a codicil.
All right.
And the codicil, Connie, says, subject to laws enacted by the General Assembly.
This is not the first time that there's been a state department within the state that has said we should not be sub, and that would be the Unemployment Security Commission said we weren't, and the Industrial Commission said we shouldn't. And so over the years, this General Assembly, because it's very North Carolina public citizen friendly to have this process in place so that there is a way for the public to have input.
What is it going to take, though, so that the State Board of Education, the legislature, the superintendent of public instruction, the governor are not at each other's throats all the time about who governs public education. We got to have a constitutional amendment.
You add on top of that the county commissioners in every county.
Right.
The local boards of school districts.
With no taxing authority.
Yeah, I've just recently gone back to the scripts. When we started this show in September of 1998, guess what we were talking about in late 1998? Governance of public schools. We hadn't changed a thing.
Right, to answer your question, I think it sits in that little book that you've got right at your hand, in that really what we need to do is go back and rewrite the Constitution so it is clear where that authority lies. That's been numerous court cases.
As Chris says, that's what the judges are going to decide, and I don't know about y'all, but I'm eager, because typically the judges have sided with the state board.
But I think it's important. These questions have been out there, whether it's Republicans or Democrats or no matter who's in charge. This is an age-old question.
I agree. I do think the courts will decide it, because I don't believe that the legislature or anyone else has the political will to take on that issue.
Speaking about judges and courts, I want to very quickly take this next subject. Judges are in the crosshairs of the legislatures who are tired of them making rulings that run counter to their desires, but we're in an interesting environment right now where the lawmakers are working to get rid of judges who rule against them. North Carolina is Exhibit A in this discussion across the nation. Our legislature wants to redistrict judicial and prosecutorial districts, eliminate the election of judges, and do whatever they can to ensure that Republicans, not Democrats, get elected to the bench. Chris, there's always been animus between the branches of government. I remember when Mark Bass-Knight and Tony Rand were running the Senate, and they just get piqued at the judicial rulings, and their solution to it was to cut the judicial budgets. These guys are going after judges.
Well, I'm always astounded at some of the rhetoric that we have. The reason we have three branches of government is to keep a check on each other. That's what the brilliance of the folks who devised this democracy we operate in thought was really important. And it's one thing to disagree, it's one thing to try again, but now we have people who literally are questioning the legitimacy of judges appointed by a president who was there 8 years, or questioning what, saying things like judges should need to get off the bench and run for the legislature. And I mean, really incredible rhetoric that I think undermines public confidence in these three branches of government.
That they are wanting to do, Connie, is involving redrawing the judicial and prosecutorial districts, which has been, 50 years they hadn't been done?
It's been a long time. And
so what's wrong? Why is this causing such a commotion? They've drawn 3 separate maps, and the Senate the House has passed 2 versions of it. The Senate won't even take it up for a vote. What's going on?
Well, first of all, it's appropriate that they redraw at the district level, because population has changed so much in these different areas. So they do, just like we do it for legislative races, this needs to happen for judicial. The Senate was very much for the appointment of judges. That's really not going anywhere. And so the House version of what they thought should happen would pass over there, and the Senate was holding out for what they were wanting. But right now,
very quickly, we're running out of time, and I got to get to tell us something we don't know. Very quickly. Does anybody see, so far as changing the Constitution to require that judges be appointed rather than elected, do you see the voters ever approving that?
Voters will never approve it, and that's what the Senate
There's one thing we're all agreeing on.
Well, you were talking about polling earlier, and polling tells us people like to elect judges in North Carolina.
All right, I got to get to the
Yes.
tell us something we don't know, because the discussion has been so good this week, we're running out of time. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I'm going to change it up this week. I'm going to tell you something we do know. 90% of Americans believe we have universal background checks on guns. 77% of gun owners believe that. It's easier in Florida to buy a semi-automatic assault weapon than it is to vote. We got to do something. How many more times are we going to be talking about guns?
Connie, tell us something we don't know.
There's a new Birth to 3 council that's studying early education. We hear a lot about NC pre-K and four-year-olds, but 0 to 3 is the most important age group, because that's when most of the brain development occurs. So you'll be seeing some new things coming out.
This was the topic of the emerging issues forum.
That's right. 0 to 3 is very important, and I think you'll see the General Assembly addressing that and restructuring coming forward.
Dennis Wicker, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, we know that 25% of our children live in poverty in North Carolina. That's a disgraceful statistic we're having to deal with. But did you know that 7% of our households, 7%, 750,000 of our people live in deep poverty, which means that they have an income of $12,000 or less. That's just egregious to me, unconscionable.
Becki Gray, tell us something we don't know.
I'll end on a little bit lighter note. We all know about the fabulous art collection and the immeasurable pieces of art at the North Carolina Art Museum. What you might not know, though, is our universities, 10 universities have art galleries or have art collections. There was an assessment done of these about 10 years ago. And I'd like for the Board of Governors to really take a look at that, revisit that to ensure that those pieces of art are protected, that they're conserved, and to look at those assets that the universities have.
All right, I've got one very quickly. In over 50 years of covering politics in North Carolina, I've never seen what we saw this week with the North Carolina Democratic Party issuing a statewide press release shaming a Democratic consultant for the fact that he went to work with Republicans. In my opinion, the shame ought to be on the party, not on Brad Crone, the political consultant. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook, and join us next week with more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Agriculture. It's North Carolina's #1 economic driver. It puts people to work. It powers our economy. And as agriculture grows, so does our quality of life. North Carolina Farm Bureau is proud to support agriculture and our farmers because agriculture connects us all.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.